Hi everyone, this is Trap Bob, and I'm a multidisciplinary artist based in Washington, D.C. I do a mix of illustration, animation, paintings, literally anything I can get my hands on. So I'm kind of all over the place, which makes my creative process very interesting and something that I have really been trying to not control, but get more to the bottom of. I have found that earlier in my career, I tended to focus more on the end result of my work. And over time, really started to notice that that was not fulfilling for me. And I realized that I wasn't really thinking about the process of it. I was kind of just trying to rush through it or ignore the beauty that comes with the actual creative process. And so over the past couple of years, I've really tried to value the process even more than the end result, because I think when you have fun, when you really let yourself think things out and take chances and experiment, you get the most beautiful work at the end without really having to think about it. Something that I like to do to start off, and sometimes I don't even like to do it, but I know that it's necessary, is to do sort of a brain dump in a blank Google Doc. I'll just open it up and just start typing any words that come up with the project that I'm working on, the theme. If I have any information to work with from the client, I like to start with that, and to also kind of remind myself what it is that I'm going to be creating. And so sometimes it takes me 2 hours to sit with the Google Doc. Sometimes I open it up and write 3 words and I know exactly what I want to do. I even get a physical reaction when I've found the idea that I want. And even towards the end of my process, when I'm finishing a design, I find that I get this kind of little jump in me that tells me I'm done. And I take that as my gut, my intuition, my subconscious, and I always listen, because a lot of times that I think is where the actual creative process is happening. I don't always know where the ideas I have come from, but I like to listen to that part of me, because I think that's the part that really actually makes the art. And I'm kind of just more like the tool to get it out. So what I'll do is just, like I said, start a Google Doc, get my idea out there. And it's actually very funny for me to go back through and look at these designs, because it doesn't really make sense sometimes what I've written down, but I will share with you a couple of those options. And so here I have a Google Doc for a gallery exhibition that I was actually curating, versus me actually creating work for the exhibition. So it was the first time that I was branding an exhibition that I wasn't a part of and that I was just curating. And so it was really interesting to think about how I could communicate what was going to be going on in that exhibition, all the artists' great work, and how they would be interpreted by the audience that comes in. And so I ended up curating the pieces based on color, because that is a big form of communication for me in my work. And it almost was a gradient rainbow going across the walls of different works. And so I wanted to be able to communicate that, these works are also amazing individually and were made from such different places, different mindsets, different styles. But it's so beautiful that color can be the one thing that can connect so many artists and, kind of get them to feel like a community, even though these pieces were all made separately. And so, I went through things like color palette. We went warm and cool. So there was like the oranges, the reds, and the pinks, and then blues, greens, and purples on different sides of the gallery. And so I wanted to make sure to speak to that and to kind of give the viewer an idea of what they were going to come to see. And part of that was also the reaction that the viewer would have to that curation and the colors, because that would be the first thing you'd see before actually getting to see the details of the artwork. So like I said, here is some of the things that I wrote down for my brain dump, and I will show you the actual design, which ended up being this eye with a kind of rainbow that isn't the usual rainbow, but it reflected the colors that we ended up having available within the pieces in the exhibition. And so that eye is kind of the idea of, the visual part that the viewer would have of seeing the pieces and how those colors are drawing them in. And then obviously playing on words with the idea of drawn in, visually drawing the viewer in, but also obviously drawings and paintings from the artists. I really love how this one came out. And here is a brain dump that I had for a mural that I made in an office building here in DC, where they had a new office that none of the employees were able to see yet because of COVID. And after I finished the mural, they would be having their first time in the office. So I got to sit down with the team over Zoom and get an idea from them about what they wanted to see when they came in. What were the things that they missed during COVID about working together and seeing people in person? And so a lot of what they said that was communicated to me and that I was drawn to was this idea of unity across division and community across division. And that actually ended up being the title of the mural. I really wanted to highlight how, all of these people are working separately, but they're doing something that comes together and impacts their whole community and the world. Their offices are scattered all over the world. And so they're dealing with different time zones, different cultures, different ideas. And I wanted to really communicate that. And so here we have the design, which I absolutely loved. And this is actually a concept that I'd always wanted to play with here, of having these kind of hands reaching and communicating the idea of togetherness. And so I brought in the globe to show, the idea of this worldly view of the work they do. They're an international development company. And also the pins that you see there on the globe are actually locations of where some of their offices are. And so the idea of community across division, I really loved because it didn't only communicate the idea of them being separate geographically, but also within the company, working in different divisions of the company. And I think this really communicated how all of their work comes together and unifies them in a lot of different ways. And here's another brain dump for a Washington Post magazine design that I was making about digital rest stops, which I'd never heard about until I got approached about this project. So I did my Googling, saw some articles about this, and something that stood out to me was that there were different takes that people had on this. Some people loved this idea and thought it was so helpful and healthy for people. And some thought it was a little almost rude and condescending to kind of demand you to rest while you're doom scrolling on Instagram, and kind of pretending to make it this sweet suggestion and more of like a, calling you out for doing something too much or what have you, even though obviously we all end up doom scrolling at some point. So I wanted to make sure to stay away from that condescending side. I wanted this to be really taken as a break. And I love the idea that artwork could be the thing to kind of snap you out of the matrix of social media. So I thought, okay, this should be more of an offering rather than a demand. And in that, I thought, what is restful to me? What do I like to do to take a break? And what's like a peaceful thing that I'd want to see? And definitely coffee is like my sanctuary. I love coffee, and it's a very special ritual for me in the beginning of the day. And then even just nature and having a view, I think that that is a visual rest that you get in real life, right? You hike a mountain, you get to the top, you get to see the view, and that is your rest stop. So I wanted to communicate that digitally and almost get the viewer to forget that they were on social media or on their phone, and maybe even get them to think of going out for a cup of coffee or taking a walk and getting outside. And so here's the design that I ended up making, which is this hand almost offering you the cup of coffee, and having this beautiful nature scene of mountains and a starry sky and these unnatural colors. I really liked working with this color palette from Washington Post mag. So yeah, I really love how this came out too. Now, I also take walks to get my mind running. I think it does a similar thing that the brain dumps do, but for my body and physically, just to get me out. And visually, I see a lot as I'm walking that stands out to me. A lot of times I see these things that stand out to me and I don't even know why, but I don't question it. Again, I follow my gut. I just take a picture and I have a folder of them and I'll go through them later. Sometimes the idea will just marinate subconsciously for me for hours, and all of a sudden I'll make sense of it. So I was working on a personal project that I like to do every year. For Valentine's Day, I make what I call Trappentines, which are just my branded Valentines. And this year I wanted the theme to be DC. I wanted it to feel local. And so I thought, what would be a great way to communicate almost like a love letter, a Valentine, but with a DC feel to it, something that anyone here in DC would see and will put a smile on their face and seem familiar and connect to. And I always have a sense of humor in my work. So I was taking a walk and saw this car with a ticket on it, which this is DC based, right? And so for us, we are used to parking tickets. It's an ongoing joke about how many parking tickets people get. And a lot of times on my walks, I see parking tickets, and I didn't understand why this stood out to me, because it was a very normal thing to see, sometimes even on my own car, unfortunately. But it stood out to me. I took a picture, I went home, and I was working, and suddenly I thought, oh, this is a great joke. And I loved the connection of it almost being like a love note left on your car from DC and it being parking tickets. And so I wanted to kind of take it over the top and dramatize it, and bring that to life. And so this was the design I ended up making. And the Trappentine said, "You're like a parking ticket. I can't get enough of you." So there you see a bunch of parking tickets kind of blowing in the wind on the windshield. And here I put a parking sign that reflected the confusion that comes with DC parking signs, because as you can see here, it's multiple parking signs usually that are very contradicting, which leads to a lot of tickets. So I had a lot of fun just kind of reimagining what that would look like in a loving way, but still in the structure of this kind of annoying thing that we deal with, but kind of making it like a DC inside joke. So again, I loved how this came out. I loved the process that went into it. And I think because I had so much fun with the process, the work came out so lovely. And so I say all of that to say, have fun with your creative process. There is not a right or wrong. I've found myself getting caught up in my process, thinking that it didn't look right, or it wasn't clean enough, it wasn't organized. And I realized that it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be however you do it. And I tend to love seeing other people's creative process. So I wanted to start being appreciative of my own and sharing it so that other people know they're not alone, and that it's not always easy, and it's not always the same. It changes every day, project to project. I have different processes. And again, I work on a lot of different mediums. So those processes sometimes cross over. Sometimes I'll use a process that I use for a mural to do a painting on a soccer ball. It depends on what it is, but I just try to keep an open mind, follow my gut and intuition. I think subconsciously that is the real artist, and that we are just the tool on the outside. So I just try to facilitate whatever my subconscious is leaning towards. I also want to say, think big. Don't hold yourself back. Don't think that something is impossible. The best ideas are the greatest ones, and then you can figure out, how to make it realistic. There's no rules when it comes to art. So think big, follow your gut, enjoy yourself, experiment, take chances. That is where true art lies. Do what you love and make sure you're passionate about it.